Excite Media's new program, Sorting Through Business And welcome to The Kick. It's a busy Thursday morning, and if you're in Brisbane, you know that it's also a very wet one. Just completed a great meeting with a new client that we're talking to, and they'd walked from a car park about a kilometre away, and it's kind of like pouring down and saying, we've got to help you out. So we got one of our team here at Excite Media to take them back up the road just to make sure they weren't going to end up like drowned rats at the end of it. Josh, Jethro, hope everything all worked out. Well, remember that Excite Media is here to look after you with all your digital marketing. So whether it's websites, SEO, if we can help you make sure that brand is still having the same impact that it did when you first launched the business, we're here to help. And we love consulting with our clients to find out what the road ahead could look like. It's no good just throwing ideas at a wall and hoping something sticks. It's got to all form part of a strategy. And if you'd like to talk to Excite Media about that, jump on the phone or visit our website, www.excitemedia.com.au. Well, today we're going to be having a look at the issues of mental well-being. You know, right the way through the pandemic, many businesses have been running 100 miles an hour. You're probably wondering if you're ever going to catch up on sleep. And if you've been living in Queensland over the last little while, not only have you had that, but you've also had the issue of four-day weeks. And you're kind of thinking, how do I keep everything running? And those 3-day weekends, they're wonderful, but it just feels like there's no time to get the other stuff done as well. So sometimes in business, we've got to look after ourselves, and the best tool that you have available is probably your brain. And if you're not looking after it, you're probably not getting high performance out of looking after your business as well. So I'm really pleased that we're going to welcome to the show here on The Kick. We're talking to Paul Pizarras. And Paul, you're with the Open Mind Institute. We've been talking to you. You've actually come and spoken to our staff before. Really a big welcome to the show. This is a timely message for many people. How did you get started with the Open Mind? You had an interesting background before you got into this.
I did, Andrew, and thank you for inviting me to The Kick. And you're quite right; it's raining buckets outside. I'm also based here in Brisbane, and yeah, my background prior to founding the Open Mind Institute was that I was a litigation lawyer for 10 years, and in that time, like many high-pressure roles, I just went through the rounds of anxiety and insomnia. There was some depression, and even when I was specializing in the criminal jurisdiction, some vicarious trauma as well. So that was many years ago, 15 plus years ago. Unfortunately, it was still at a time where, you know, putting your hand up for mental health was deemed as a weakness within the legal profession. I think we've come a long way across all industries now, that it's no longer a sign of weakness. It's no longer taboo. But that was my experience at the time. But I was fortunate, Andrew, for two things. One, I had a background in behavioral science prior to going into the law. And I was also very fortunate to have a mentor at the time. And things really came to a head for me. There was a tipping point, which I won't go into too much detail, but long story short, there was a client I had who very sadly took their own life. And for me, that really caused me to do a lot of introspection. And so my mentor took me to a mindfulness meditation class in Melbourne, in Carlton. And that 1 hour I can trace back to being the spark that really enlivened the curiosity in me, and really started me down this path of mental well-being. I just jumped down the rabbit hole, did a lot of research into mindfulness, meditation. I think it was the lawyer in me that really needed to hear the evidence behind that if I was to spend a lot of time on it. And that ultimately led to the founding of the Open Mind Institute in 2016 with a colleague I went to law school with. So that's my background in a nutshell.
It's interesting, just looking at your legal background. Now, I love a good legal drama on TV. I've just finished watching Bull, which is kind of looking at jury selection and all of that. And Suits was a great series. And I really
Yes.
found it interesting that Harvey Specter is the guy who's got it all together in suits, the legal genius doing his thing in New York, and then suddenly works out he actually has anxiety issues and it cripples him. And I guess
Mm,
it just humanizes the fact that all of us at some stage are going to deal with a mental health issue. It may be temporary, it may be long term. How do we deal with it?
mm. Great question. Well, on that first point, you're exactly right. It is so common these days. Um, you know, at least I think it's 1 in 4 now Australians will take time off for some sort of mental health concern or some mental health illness. How do we deal with it? There's no band-aid solution. There's no quick or easy fix. It's unfortunately a degree of it is subjective, Andrew. In that first and foremost, you have to acknowledge that this is something you're going through yourself, and you have to muster the courage to put your hand up for help. And I would suggest to the listeners that's your starting point. Um, you know, lean on those around you for support. Um, if you're noticing that if you're in a dark headspace for longer than a week, right? There are some great services we have in this country, um, Lifeline being one of them. So that's your first point of call, reaching out for help, and then I would encourage you if you're a small business owner, or even if you're in a job that maybe you've lost your sense of purpose or passion for the role. I'd encourage you to look into things such as meditation practice, mindfulness practice. Um, you know, surround yourself with people who are also on that journey of self transformation. Then, very slowly but surely, the psyche starts to lift in a positive sense.
Paul, one of the things that as business owners we need to realize is we've got to look after ourselves. If we went to see a professional, whether it's our GP or a counsellor, they're probably going to walk us through some questions to try and analyze how deep we are,
Mm,
whether it's depression or something of that stage. But as business owners, we've also got to look after our team. Is there a way that we can create a culture that actually helps people not deal with the stigma? Because you're absolutely right. For many years, you didn't put your hand up because it was a sign of
mm.
weakness. How do we keep breaking that model?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. It reminds me of something I saw on a subway wall in London once, and it said the true measure of a team is not how we come together in times of comfort, right? In times of convenience. The true measure of a team is how we come together in times of challenge, in times of controversy, right? And the best way to do that is to have an open door policy, to have open communication, to have forums and meetings devoted to just being human and not only just about business. Give your team the space and opportunity to debrief about what's going on in their personal life, because as small business owners there is a clear overlap with your personal life. If you're highly strung and stressed at work, you're not entirely present with your loved ones. And similarly, if you have things going on in your personal life, we bring that into the workspace. So I think if it's one thing the pandemic has taught us, this line, this separation between work and personal life has become somewhat blurred. But that doesn't mean, um, you know, that we are in this alone, right? If we rally around, or we have people around us who are open minded, who do practice something called authentic relating. That I'd love to expand on that a little bit, because I think there's great benefit and it answers the question and can very much help a lot of the listeners. So, authentic relating is an emerging field, very much so in the US now. And it's all about being able to authentically communicate what it is you're feeling in the present moment, right? And that might sound very simple and somewhat hoo ha, but I'd urge you and the listeners to think about that for a moment. Like, are we able to articulate whatever's going on within us internally clearly, right? Effective communication. Because more often than not, there are barriers to communication, right? A lot of us, we live in our vessel and we are quite wary of perhaps other people casting judgments. So authentic relating, and there's some very simple ways you can do this and introduce it into the workplace. And I'll just run you through one now, Andrew. There's something called the noticing game, and it's quite fun. You can do this with your family as well. And look, if you're feeling courageous, we can do it right here and right now. What do you say? Are you up for playing
Yeah,
the noticing
absolutely.
game?
It's something that I've done with
Yeah,
my family as well. But let's see exactly which spin we're going to take on this,
yeah,
because there could be some
okay.
noticing that I don't want going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the point of it is checking in with yourself and being a little bit more vulnerable. Yeah, and that takes courage. So the way this works is really simple. The first speaker will, and I'll say, Andrew, being here with you or sitting here with you, I notice. And that person just says whatever they notice in the present moment. For example, I might notice something about your very intriguing background, or I might notice about how I'm feeling in this moment. And then after I convey that message, you simply let it land, check in with yourself, and then you say, Paul, hearing that, I notice. And you do the same. So you might notice something about what I've just said, might notice about how my statement has made you feel. And the first few rounds are a little bit awkward, but you'll notice after the second or third round, let's see if we can go there, it gets quite authentic. You actually establish a genuine connection with the other human being. So let's
Love it.
dive right
Let's
in.
start.
Okay, Andrew, being here with you, I notice your background, and for those of you who are tuning in live on Facebook, you can see there are a lot of figurines and intriguing figurines, and it takes me back to when I met you in person, when I came into Excite Media and delivered a presentation to the team. The first space that I noticed was your creative space. And I noticed that leads me to assume that you're perhaps quite a creative and fun person. And I'm also noticing, again, it's an assumption, but there's a lot of warmth and humility and a human factor in you that I also heard straight off the bat in your introduction in, a moment ago.
Paul, that is very complimentary, and thank you. It's interesting. I was talking to my wife just about this whole background wall. You can go into some meetings, so I should probably use the right words. I'm noticing a memory of a conversation that I had with my wife talking about my video backgrounds when I do these calls. And for the last 2 years, I've been doing Zoom calls with many clients. I like the fact that there's a bit of my personality. I love movies, doing movie reviews. There's a little bit of Star Wars here. There's a little bit of Lord of the Rings at home. And you sometimes question yourself whether you should have a very unprofessional background when you're meant to be giving good business advice to business people. And so you ask yourself, should I be creative or should I be bland so that I can be professional? And I've leaned towards the authentic side, but I do question myself from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andrew, hearing that, I noticed a positive side effect from us just engaging in this authentic communication is that we've already established something in common. I'm a lover of movies. I'm a lover of Star Wars. And to your second point around questioning, I think it's a natural human inclination to question or to think twice about how we're projecting ourselves to the world, right? But the stance that you take, I admire, I applaud, and I would urge everyone listening to do the same, right? We are who we are, and we don't have to hide that from the world, right? We are, if we have the courage to be authentic, then and even be vulnerable, unbeknown to us, it gives other people the permission to do the same. So my 2 cents for what it's worth is, cast aside any judgments that we think are being casted upon us. Be you, and that is good enough.
Yeah, I notice in what you were saying there about the vulnerable part. Sometimes you're in a meeting, you're meeting for the first time. You want to give confidence that we actually do know what we're talking about. But sometimes in doing that, we also don't want to show our weakness, that there are areas that we aren't good at, that we can't contribute, that we might let you down in. However, it's funny that when you do let your guard down and have those open conversations, it builds trust. Suddenly, we're not all kind of blowhard and trying to be the best person in the room. And that reminds me, Simon Sinek says he actually wants to be the person with the biggest questions in the room.
Yes.
But it's a challenge because we've got to let our guard down.
It is a challenge, and I think it's wrapped up in our concept of self-identity, right? Our role, our title. A lot of people, excuse me, struggle with things like imposter syndrome, right? But if we peel all those layers back, it comes down to that primal emotion of fear, right? Fear of judgment, fear of failure. I'm a Simon Sinek fan as well, and there's great truth in that statement. In that, a lot can be said from asking the right questions, putting your hand up, admitting when you don't know the answers, right? And it also reminds me the difference between, I do a bit of this in my coaching, Andrew, but the difference between armored communication and armored leadership, that's when we lead from self-protection, when we perhaps we're trying to
That's
project
nice. I haven't heard that.
a certain image. But the flip side to that is daring communication or daring leadership, which is being a little bit more vulnerable, right? Putting your hand up, say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. But how would you go about, just asking those right questions you made reference to? And I think, going back to the initial question, everything we've just spoken about for the last 5 minutes, this can be implemented in a workplace. Right? Why not?
That's a good point. And it's initiating those conversations rather than pat answers, isn't it? I was just talking to some of our staff today, and a particular scenario where somebody wanted to talk about what was going on in their life. And when they went to deal with somebody, all they got was a kind of a pat answer that shut everything down and didn't allow the conversation to flow. So I guess sometimes we've got to make sure that we don't deliver things that are closed off. And your idea that you said, answering with another question, helps thread things out, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah, very good point. It certainly does. I think it also it allows for a culture built on curiosity, and I
Yes.
think the other element we have to make reference to is that sense of having psychological safety. That this is a safe space. And look, fair enough. I mean, there'll be moments when it comes to running a business where you have to have meetings that are based on procedure, right? Based on protocol is not the right word, but based on things that are critical for the running of that business. But and that's all very well and good, but we also need to allocate time for having a creative space or having a time where we can be human, express what's going on in our personal life. And I think it's really integral, especially in small business, that you have that balance.
Paul, what I'd like to do, I'm just going to bring up your website in just a moment, but I would like to close getting maybe a few ideas where we can do a personal checkup on ourselves and maybe some questions that you can prompt us with. But if you'd like to know more about the work of the Open Mind Institute, do feel free to visit Paul's website. You can find out more details by visiting tomi.org.au. There it is on the screen for you. And there you can find out exactly what Paul's team can actually offer just by having a look through and getting some sense of how it works for you personally as well as your business. Paul, when you think of what, do you refer to it as TOMI or the Open Mind Institute? It's got a nice ring about it, TOMI. But
Yeah, so it does. We're affectionately known as Tomi or Tommy, but otherwise, in a professional sense, the Open Mind Institute. Yeah.
And give a quick summary of if somebody came to you for the first time, you give some opportunities here for people to reach out to you, whether it's for personal, business, or events type work. And there's a free 30-minute discovery call here. Keep in mind, visit tomi.org.au. What would be a summary, Paul, of the services that you offer?
Well, there's three primary services, Andrew. There's the coaching that we do. So there's workplace coaching, there's one-on-one coaching, executive coaching. Then we have the events, live workshops. We go into workplaces and deliver events on a whole range of topics, from emotional, social intelligence, critical thinking, problem solving, mental well-being. And the last one is around digital courses. But the way I would summarize all three is very simple. We help people, we help organizations to firstly identify the conditioning, the roadblocks that are no longer serving them. And then we impart upon them the evidence based tools to transcend that conditioning that is no longer serving them. And the other side of that is a magical transformational place. Right? It's where you can step into your potential, step into your passion, and create the life that you want.
So if we were to kind of wind up by having a chat about where people can go from here, sometimes we actually don't realize that we are so close to the wall we're about to hit it because we don't check in on ourselves. Could you give us a couple of tips just to be able to wind up today's session that we can look at maybe for ourselves or our business that might then trigger the next step of pursuing help? Or I love the way you put ideas that don't serve us any longer. Sometimes we've got to throw out the old model and bring in something new.
Yeah, yeah. Great question, Andrew. I would say you need to take a step back. Sometimes when we are in the whirlwind of life, we are purely running on reactive mode, right? We wake up in the morning, we're checking our devices, we're experiencing something called the cortisol awakening response, right? Experiencing a 60 to 70% spike in cortisol. We're literally on lives receiving it. So when I say take a step back, if you can allocate some time for yourself, right, on the weekend, 1 or 2 hours, just take time to pause, pan up, look at your life, your business from a bird's eye perspective. And I would encourage you to also do some introspection work. And that's as simple as closing your eyes. Even if you've never meditated before, close your eyes, do a body audit, check in with yourself, see where, if you're feeling any aches or pains. And then after that hour or two of doing some soul searching, my suggestion would be to get out the traditional pen and paper, do some journaling, right? Start prioritizing what you want to achieve for your own well-being, right? So that might include a whole range of things, from starting an exercise routine, eating healthier, going to bed at a decent hour. Because I can tell you and the listeners unequivocally, when you get that in order, it correlates into a successful business. And it's from that platform that you can then go about perhaps rejigging your business vision or the business values, and a great alignment starts to emerge. But it all starts with yourself. And I'd leave you with this: that's not being selfish. It's the antithesis. It's being selfless. When you get the vessel and the mind humming along, you're more present in relationships. You're coming from a more focused headspace when it comes to business, and you're bringing a lot more energy and authenticity to your human ecosystem.
Paul, I think you've nailed it. And thank you very much for being on the kick. If you've been running at 100 miles an hour in your business for the last 2 years, you do need time to breathe. And if this edition of the kick has given you a little bit of a push in the right direction of actually doing a checkup from the neck up, as Zig Ziglar used to say, and just looking at where you're at today, give yourself some time to be able to look at where you are at. The business is just an outflow of who you are. And so if you can take that opportunity and reach out to the team at the Open Mind Institute, talk to Paul and his team about what they can offer your business. Paul, thanks very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. Take care.
Well, we're going to be back next week, next Thursday. We've got a couple of great guests lined up. One thing for anybody that's interested in what's happening in the world of digital marketing, or in particular websites, WordPress 6.0 is just on or around the corner. We're going to be catching up with Andy very shortly, who heads up our support team, and find out exactly what's going on with WordPress 6.0. It might be a little bit geeky, but for many businesses, if that's your website, good to know what's happening and whether you've got some new features you can use. We'll see you next Thursday.